Okay, so we are kicking off our 2 days of live coverage of the CAIS conference in not so sunny Beverly Hills today, but absolutely in the beautiful Beverly Hilton. And we're kicking things off with Eddy Augsten, who is the president of Concurrent. Eddy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, super excited to be here, Chuck. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is my third time covering the CAIS conference, and it's fantastic. It's a cornucopia of alternative information. So I'm really glad that you're kicking us off today.
Yeah. Also, my third trip out here, and it's really a great time, great experience all around.
Without question. Okay, so we're going to talk about alts pretty much for the next couple of days, but we're going to try to put it in through a different lens. So first of all, maybe just tell us a bit about Concurrent, and then if you would, how you guys are deploying alts at your shop.
Yeah, so Concurrent, we feel like we've been redefining the RA partnership model for years now. We not only have advisors that join us and retain a majority stake in their business, but we encourage it and we incentivize it. We also encourage them to retain their branding, their identity, because we believe that the greatest value in that partnership is the advisor and the client's relationship. Mm-hmm. And in return for that, we deliver enterprise scale, a capital partnership, a community that we believe they can be proud of. And so, from an alts perspective, we built a platform that really supports advisors at the entire spectrum of where they're at, from a private market alternative investment perspective. And what that means is we have a couple of platforms like a CAIS, CAIS being really our number one platform, where we white label it, due diligence it, curate it for the advisor, provide all the investment memos and due diligence to those advisors. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, we also run interval fund models, a growth, balance, and income model, which we deploy for them. We support them and educate them around it, but we also take care of all the operational lift that's required to operationally implement interval fund models and interval funds within the trading aspects of the business. So we believe in alts, but it's also one of these areas that requires a ton of education, and that's a lot of the work that we do every day.
Yep. So I think education is key. Education not just for the advisors, but also for the end clients. Absolutely. Right? I think it's a great investment. So at our shop at Sovereign, we love alts. We actually just launched our own tender offer fund, which is our answer to how to do this. Basically, it's a one-ticket solution. They get into 14 of the top funds, KKR, Apollo, Golub, all those other ones. So there's a lot of different ways to get that exposure. But I think it's important to have some exposure. But let's dive into more on the education side, because alts, as I like to say, there's good and bad to everything. One of the issues that I think requires the most amount of education is liquidity. How are you guys addressing that with your advisors and with your clients?
Yeah, no, I think liquidity is critical, and it's not just educating both the advisor and the client in terms of what liquidity is. It's setting those expectations. But what we've learned over the last 25 years, when you think about what's happened in private markets and alternatives, and BDCs and non-traded REITs, there's a component of education, sort of telling the client and telling the advisor what liquidity looks like. There's another component of making them understand the impact that'll have, right? So like the operational component of it. And so we spend a lot of time making them understand how they should approach portfolio construction, where these investments fit into it from a liquidity perspective, and what the expectations should be, and not just educating them on exactly what liquidity means, for example.
Right. I think that's very important. I assume you guys are fairly financial planning focused at your shop? Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? So the way we look at it is not so much how do we invest your portfolio, but rather how do you invest your portfolio that you need in the short term, intermediate term, and long term. So there's at least 3 or 4 different sub-portfolios is how we look at it.
That's exactly
and as a planning
right.
shop, you guys are probably looking at it the same way, yes?
Yeah.
So alts do not belong in your short-term portfolio. They probably don't belong in your intermediate-term portfolio, but I think there's a real important place for them in the long-term portfolio. Would you agree with that?
We do, and I think of it like, if you think about the traditional risk-reward diagram, we add another level of, think of it like a Rubik's Cube. So if you think about it as a Rubik's Cube, it's risk, return, liquidity. Yep. And as you think about the duration of a client's assets, if you think about the sophistication and complexity of a client's experience, we think about that Rubik's Cube and how complex do you want the investment and the structure of the portfolio to look like. So I agree with you completely that those are very important components from a planning perspective, yes.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting component to add into that. So, I've been an advisor for 30 years. You always talk about risk and return. But to your point, we're looking at it the same way. So it's no longer just risk return, it's risk return and what's liquidity. So the way we put it when we're talking to clients about financial planning, I think financial planning at its core is how much money does the client need and when? And then based on that, you can back into a model. If the when is next month for a down payment, not a good place for a private credit fund.
That's right.
But if the when is 15, 20 years from now, which is retirement, private credit, private equity really should play some level of a role in that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And if you think of it from that context, which I think you're absolutely correct, one other component that we really spend a lot of time on is developing the investment program, right? So if you think about from an institutional construct, the investment program is pretty critical because as you're thinking about private markets and alternatives, you have to really not just think about the individual product or the best idea or the really shiny object that just walked into the office, but rather it's if you have an investment program, how do those components, how do those investments fit into that investment program? And really when you start adding the longevity of these assets and the complexity of these assets, the portfolio construction investment program becomes critical to that process. And I think that's a little different from traditional assets where, it's bonds, it's equity, we understand how they work and how they function within a market cycle. So adding alts really becomes how are we going to deploy it over time and what asset classes, sub-asset classes, and how do they contribute to that development over time? And that's a lot of what we're focusing on.
Okay, well I tell you what, Eddie, that's a great place to put a pin in it for today. Thanks a lot for taking some time.
I appreciate it, thank you, Chuck.
You bet. All right, so that's kicking off our 2 days of coverage. We have 3 more segments to go today. Up next, we're going to be talking about private credit and is it or is it not a crowded trade? Stay tuned for that. We'll be back in another 45 minutes. Thanks for joining us, and Eddie, thanks again.
Thank you.